Welcome to the Drake Shake, a polar podcast hosted by seasoned Antarctica expedition guide Neil Drake. With over 10 seasons guiding and 1,000 days spent on the ice, Neil will be joined by fellow guides and industry experts to share their years of experience and knowledge to help you make the most informed decision when planning your once-in-a-lifetime adventure. From picking the right itinerary to deciding when to go, we will cover it all. The Drake Shake is brought to you by Antarctica Travel Group and Let'sGoPolar.com. Now, here's your host, Neil Drake, with this week's episode.
All right. Have you ever done a podcast before?
No, this would be my first podcast.
Have you ever listened to a podcast?
I listen to way too many podcasts.
Okay, so you get the format. You know what we're doing here.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Drake Shake podcast. My name is Neil Drake, and I'll be your host. And today I'm joined by co-host Nikki. Hi, Nikki. How are you?
Hello. Oh, I'm so unbelievably wonderful. How are you doing today?
I'm good. For people who don't know, that little intro that you just heard, that was Nikki's voice. Nikki did that for us.
I did do that.
We hired somebody. I hired somebody. I paid somebody a good amount of money to do it. And my whole team was like, no, that was terrible. Nikki's like, I'll do it for free and I'll do a way better job. So that was Nikki. I hope everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Nikki.
I think my exact words were, I will do literally anything for attention.
And then Nikki, why are you doing so incredibly good? Where are you off to in the next couple of days?
I'm going to be going from Ushuaia all the way up to Cabo Verde. And I get to stop along the way in South Georgia and Tristan da Cunha and St. Helena. And I'm wildly excited that I get to do this trip. It's going to be so much fun. 33 days on a boat. Can't wait.
Perfect timing, because today's episode is talking about South Georgia and whether or not South Georgia is worth it. Nikki, you've already been to South Georgia, so we're glad to have you here, and you're on your way. But I'm also really excited to introduce our special guest for the day, Jeff Nagel. Welcome to the Drake Shake podcast. How are you doing, Mr. Nagel?
I'm doing really well, Neil. Nice to see you, Nikki. I was just in South Georgia recently as well, so you've got a lot to be excited about.
We gave Jeff a little rundown of what we're going to talk about today, and Jeff just went on to tell us about how he had just the most incredible South Georgia trip just before this podcast. I do want to give a quick little shout out to Jamie Watts, because Jamie and I actually filmed this episode 5 or 6 days ago, but he was in Porter Williams in between two different trips. I had a couple days on land, but either the connection was really bad or something was going on. He had a glitch in the system, but I ended up having no audio from Jamie, and he had to get back on the ship a couple days ago. So we're actually re-recording this episode, and Jeff, really short notice, I texted him like an hour ago and I was like, hey, Jeff, do you want to do a quick episode with me? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. Thank you, Jeff, for filling this in for us really quick. And I know the South Georgia topic is such a big one for people. So this one's going to be definitely one of our more listened to episodes. Jeff, I like to start off these episodes with a bit of a cold opener.
Yeah.
And he loves making that joke.
And I'm going to make it every single time.
But
doom.
So we did the first episode with Phil. I would say that people referred to you, me, and Phil as kind of like the three musketeers or the three amigos. We're super close. We've been to the Arctic together. We've done a lot of trips to Antarctica together. And I spilled the beans, and I shared a very personal, intimate story about how Phil actually named the podcast. I had originally wanted to call it the Drake Passage, and I called Phil and I told him all about it. And I told him, I was like, guess the name. And he's like, the Drake Shake. And I was like, oh God, that's so much. I do want to share a personal, intimate fact about my relationship with Jeff. I think you know what I'm going to say. You know what I'm going to say. Yeah.
It was a South Georgia trip, actually.
It was a South Georgia trip. Jeff and I were on a South Georgia trip together. We were in Stanley in the Falkland Islands. Jeff and I had a late shift in town, so we had a morning cup of coffee and we were just hanging out. And we were leaving the ship to go, do our shift inside the town, helping the guests navigate around. We were getting off the ship. We were crossing the gangway. There's a little bridge right there, and we were just surrounded by these Commerson's dolphins. It was just me, Jeff, and a bunch of dolphins. And the day started so well, and Jeff and I just started walking into town, and we were starting to have a serious conversation. It wasn't a serious conversation. It was actually a very lighthearted conversation. And you said one thing that made me decide that I was going to marry my then girlfriend, who is now my wife. One sentence came out of Jeff's mouth and everything changed. And I remember Jeff and I spent that day running around the Falkland Islands. We were running around Stanley trying to find a ring because my wife is coming on the next trip with me. We didn't find one there, but I did get one when we got off the ship. And I haven't told anybody what you said. That's between you and I. That's our little moment, our little gem. But I think my wife thanks you every single day for saying what you said to finally get me to propose. I don't think people understand the relationships that guides build when they're on ships. Like we're like family. Like we have big impacts on each other's lives. And you and I,
I remember that walk really well, and I remember your whole demeanor changed. Like all of a sudden, Neil got serious.
Whoa!
I know.
And if you don't know me, I don't get very serious from time to time. So
yeah, it was special. It was awesome.
The hardest part was we were in between trips, so I got off the ship, found a ring, and then my wife was getting on the next trip, and I had the whole thing planned. I was going to take her out to Zodiac and propose to her there. I have the ring in my life jacket, ready to do it in a few days when we're on the Zodiac, and I did it in the Zodiac. But the hardest part was like just laying there the first night on the ship and not just not pulling it out and being like, "Baby, will you marry me?" I was so excited. I was so excited to do it. So, Jeff, you will always have an impact of a significant change on my life, and I love you for it, as to my wife. So yeah, one more quick story. Jeff and I, we've always worked together as expedition guides. We never really work in a leadership role. And that's not because we're not qualified to do it, and not that we haven't been asked a lot. But I remember there was one time you and I were working on a ship together, and we were sitting in the lounge. I think we had a beer in our hands, and we saw the captain come running down the stairs. We saw the expedition leader go running across the lounge. And then we saw the chief engineer come running up the stairs, and there was a whole bunch of stuff going on, and they just started running away. And you and I looked at each other and we were like, yeah, we're just totally happy being guides.
Neil, I've made the mistake of going into expedition leadership, and it's a lot, man. Now I've got to run with the captain.
No, I don't want those responsibilities. I like just being in the Zodiac. Because Jeff and I are always, when we do Zodiac cruises, we're always Zodiac buddies. Yeah, for people who haven't been yet, when you go out in a Zodiac cruise, you have to work a buddy system. And Jeff and I just love working together as buddies.
I think any Zodiac cruise is always better when you have two drivers who are literally buddies, and you get that banter going back and forth. And I don't know, for Neil and I think we both like to bring the guests in the boat, the passengers, into the banter. It just makes for a better time. Yeah.
And I think because we're very seasoned guides, so we're trusted by the expedition leader, we're trusted by the captain, so that we can kind of just go do our thing, and they know that we're going to be safe, we're going to be responsible, but we can go find a lot of adventures when we're out doing our thing, and it's a really good time. All right, so let's get in today's episode. Today's episode is going to be about South Georgia, and it's not going to be a deep dive into South Georgia. We've got a lot of episodes down the line for that. This episode is going to be more about whether or not South Georgia is quote unquote worth it. This is a question that we get all the time from people. It's posted up in the Facebook group probably once a week. When people are in the planning stages, they always want to know, is South Georgia worth it? And for me, I think it's such a loaded question because, you could answer this question very briefly. Jeff, is South Georgia worth it? Yes or no?
Yes.
Episode over. Done. Put a pin in it. Period. Finish it. That's it.
Quickest episode
over.
Ever.
No, absolutely 1000%. If you're on the fence between whether or not to go to South Georgia, it is worth it by every sense of the word. But we need to understand what it means to be worth it. Is it worth the time? Is it worth the money? Is it just more hoopla than it is? So let's dive into what is it about South Georgia that does make it so worth it. First, we kind of got to acknowledge that South Georgia is a significant cost commitment as well as a time commitment. That would be the first two things that people are starting to consider when it comes to whether or not South Georgia is worth it. And if we talk about the finances first, we have to acknowledge that, is it worth going into significant amounts of debt or taking out a HELOC against your house to pay for a trip? I don't know. It's not worth it to that degree. I would say that if you're saving, year after year, and you finally have saved up enough money to go to Antarctica, but now you're wondering if it's worth going to South Georgia, and you can wait 2 or 3 more years and save a little bit more, then I would postpone your Antarctica trip to do a South Georgia trip. That's where I see that there's value and it's worth it if you can get off the time. The time is the other hard part too, because we talk about South Georgia trips. They're not short, Jeff. A typical South Georgia trip is what? 17?
18 days, but some 20 days. Depends on who you book through and what it is you want to see. Are the Falklands included? Where on the peninsula are you going? There's a whole bunch of it depends.
You did not listen to the first episode that we recorded with Phil?
No, I did not.
The first thing that Phil said was, it depends. That's how we live in the expedition world. We live by the mantra of "it depends."
It's a standard saying, I think, in the industry. A real PTGA saying also.
Nikki, Nikki, this is a great example because you did your first South Georgia trip was how long?
It was 19 days.
Oh, right in the middle, the sweet spot.
Right in the sweet spot, yeah. And it was over Christmas and New Year's.
Even better. I love those trips. Those are good ones.
Oh, yeah.
And then your next trip is how long?
33 days.
33 days.
Yeah,
Nikki
very
texted
significant difference.
Nikki texted me, she goes, I don't have to cook or clean for myself for 33 days. This is the best thing ever.
I cannot wait.
No doing laundry.
No doing. Well, that I'll have to do some sink laundry, but that's fine.
So a typical South Georgia trip is 18 to 23 days. I think is pretty standard for the trips. The majority of them are that 18, 19, 20. Some of those trips that are the 2021s, they're still 18 or 19 day itineraries, but they include a pre-embarkation hotel or something along those lines. And then the longer ones that are usually 22 or 23 days, they usually try to wrap in a circle crossing along with the South Georgia trip. And those trips are only a few a year. There's only about 4 or 5 of those a year, but those are sort of on the longer side. But the typical cookie cutter South Georgia trip, 18, 19, 20 days. We'll kind of operate under that premise for the sake of this. And then the other thing about those trips, some of them go counterclockwise and some of them go clockwise. And some of those trips start in one location and they end in another. They might start in Puerto Madryn and then end in Ushuaia. Or like Nikki's trip, you're starting in Ushuaia and you're ending where?
Cape Verde in Africa.
So that's not every trip. That's just sort of the shoulder season trips. So there's a little bit more to a South Georgia trip when it comes to timing and planning. When it comes to the pricing difference, there's also a wide range of pricing that comes on the South Georgia trips. And it depends if you're booking last minute or you're booking early bird. We have a whole episode we're going to do on that as well. But would you say roughly 20 or 30% more, maybe even a little bit more?
I would say at least 20 or 30%, especially next year. The prices are like significantly higher than they were this past season. I think as South Georgia grows in popularity and as Antarctica grows in popularity in general, trips are getting more expensive. And I'm already seeing a lot of the South Georgia trips for next season. The lower priced rooms are already sold out.
That's going to be a whole episode on when to book, especially for these trips that are in such high demand like South Georgia. So we've talked about the time and the financial commitment that comes alongside of it. And I think the people who are most interested in this episode have already taken those things into consideration. So we're going to kind of give them a little bit of information to kind of help them make that decision a little more informatively. What's important to them? What are the differences in South Georgia? What can you see in South Georgia that you can't see anywhere else? And that's what Jeff is here for. Jeff, you've been an expedition guide and now expedition leader for how long?
Started in 2013 in the polar regions. Yeah. It's a blink of an eye, but it's a while now.
And of that, how many South Georgia trips do you think you've made?
I don't know. I'm not one of those people that's good at keeping track of the numbers and how many times I've crossed the Drake and how many times I've been to South Georgia. But on average, I'm going once or twice a year to South Georgia. So even for us guides, it's not the standard trip. We all get excited about it as well, because for most of us, we only get to guide on 1 or 2 of these trips a season.
Do you try and plan your season around how many South Georgia trips that you can get in? Because I do.
Absolutely, I do. Absolutely, I do. Yeah, they're my favorites. No doubt about it.
If there's like a stretch and there's like a contract opportunity, it's just 8 Antarctica trips in a row with no South Georgia, I won't take the contract. I have to get a couple South Georgias in each season.
Mm-hmm. You do. And there's many reasons for that, right? It's not just South Georgia itself. It's also the length of the trip adds something to the experience. You get this intimate relationship with all the passengers and all your fellow guides and stuff. It becomes a real collaborative effort. Everybody's just feeding off of each other, their energy. So there's more to it than just the destination, I would say.
Oh, I'm so glad you bring that up. That's one of the things I talk about is that now, instead of these 10-day trips, it's kind of like a quick turnover. You're absolutely right. Not only do you get to develop a relationship with your guides and the other passengers and the hospitality staff on board and the bartenders and your room stewards, you also have a lot more time for educational content as well. So if you're really interested in that material that these guides are providing, these lectures and these talks, you have a lot more time on the ship to attend those. So you're going to expand your knowledge way beyond you would on a classic Antarctica trip.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything. It's kind of these longer trips, it's a bit of a double down on everything. You know, whatever ship you're on is going to start to feel like home over the course of this trip, and you're going to start to feel really, really comfortable. You're going to start to feel comfortable with your fellow guests. You're going to build friendships that, it can happen, and it does happen on shorter trips, but certainly your chances of these things happening increase on a South Georgia trip, on these longer trips.
How many times have you seen it where a passenger will be on a 10-day classic Antarctica trip, and then they'll find out the next trip is going to South Georgia, and they pull whatever strings they can at work, and they max out their credit cards, and they just stay on board? I've seen that at least once or twice every season that I've been down there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Both north and south, I've seen this happen where people just all of a sudden they're on for 3 trips, and yeah, they become like another expedition team member.
Yeah. I actually know one person, Anna, eventually got a job. Now she works as the gift shop attendant on one of the ships. Obviously, not everybody has that kind of financial leeway and that time leeway. And on that note, one thing I want to make sure that we don't do in this episode is I don't want to disparage anybody who does not have the time or financial resources to do a South Georgia trip. Because even if you can only afford an Antarctica trip without South Georgia, you're still going to have an incredible experience. And South Georgia might just be something that you have to put up on your dream board and make it happen a couple of years down the road. But if you're not in a position to do a South Georgia trip now, please don't ever feel like your Antarctica trip is somehow compromised or has less value than a South Georgia trip. We understand that there's a lot more money and a lot more time that needs to be allocated in order to make these trips happen. And hopefully this episode will just provide you a little bit of inspiration to maybe wait a little bit longer or to put yourself in a position where you may be able to take these trips. Let's dive a little bit deeper into the differences of South Georgia, or what South Georgia may offer on top of what people might have in their normal Antarctica experience. Jeff, before we get into the wildlife, I want to dive right into the historic significance of South Georgia, because this is your bread and butter. This is your arena. You are a history buff through and through. Talk to me a little bit about the historic significance of South Georgia and the things that we might get to experience on a typical South Georgia itinerary that call back to some of the early days of polar exploration.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. We need to do a whole nother episode on just that. But, what comes first and foremost to people's mind is Shackleton, right? Sir Ernest Shackleton. And we're talking about the Trans-Imperial Antarctic expedition, the endurance that got trapped in the ice, the struggle for survival that is almost unequaled out there in the polar history world. It's just an epic tale, and the tale ends in South Georgia. It's a big part of the story. So we talked a little bit about, do you go clockwise? Do you go counterclockwise? And I think, actually, from a historic perspective, I want to go counterclockwise. I want to go to the peninsula first because I want to be where the expedition began. The ship, the Endurance, first made landfall in South Georgia, and from there, from the whaling stations, traveled down into the Weddell Sea and down towards Antarctica and down towards the peninsula. The story really begins when the ship gets trapped in ice in the Weddell Sea, and then there's a dash for survival across the sea ice, and then in a small boat journey up to Elephant Island in the South Shetlands, just north of the Antarctic Peninsula, where, if you've booked an Antarctic trip, you'll be going. So there's a little place there called Point Wild, where the men spent an amazing amount of time, 4 months or something, stranded, while Shackleton and a bunch of the other crews, 5 other crew members, made the greatest small boat journey in history across the Southern Ocean over to South Georgia, 800 miles in 16 days. And they end up landing in South Georgia and then doing a foot journey across the mountains. South Georgia is an incredibly glaciated and mountainous island. And they eventually get to a whaling station, and he's able to find help for his men. All the men survive. And this is the iconic story that, that most people really want to get involved in.
We hear a lot of people who specifically say that they want to do this trip because they have some connection or some emotional investment in the Shackleton story. And like we talked about just a little bit earlier, the educational content that we receive on the ship, a lot of that will be focused on the Shackleton story and some of the other explorers that have been in this region while we're on the sea days crossing between the peninsula and South Georgia. And you'll get a lot of that story. Like you said, we'll do a whole episode on the history. I really want to have you back for an episode on the literature, on like the books that we should be reading before we go on these expeditions so we can feel a little bit more connected to the story. That's a whole other episode that you and I are going to do together. And I do agree with you. I like counterclockwise a little bit better. because of the penguins, but we'll get to that when we talk about penguin colonies. You mentioned that a lot of the story happens in South Georgia. We can visit Shackleton's grave. That is in South Georgia as well. That's a big, significant landmark for people. Nikki, did you make it to Shackleton's grave when you were there?
I did, and I had the shot of whiskey to toast to him at, I believe, 9:45 in the morning, and it was glorious.
Usually somebody comes out. Did you have somebody do a little speech or a little toast to the boss?
Yep. Yeah, there was a really lovely short ceremony that happened when you have to go in shifts because there's only so many people out in the space at a time. So we went up, we had a little speech, we all gave a toast, we had a shot of whiskey, and then we continued exploring the area.
Nice. I think it's worth saying that this all takes place in Grytviken, one of the whaling stations, and Grytviken is has had a lot of preservation work done. All of these whaling stations were overwhelmed with asbestos. Everything was built with asbestos, and all the asbestos has been pulled out of Grytviken. And now there's a museum in King Edward Point that is there, where the government bodies are there. But this is also where the Endurance set off from South Georgia on its journey to Antarctica. And on a later expedition, Shackleton died on the way back to South Georgia, and he is now buried in South Georgia. By his wife's request. And on his left side is his right-hand man, Frank Wild. And so
he's a whole other episode, Frank Wild. He was a real hero of the whole thing, right? For anybody who's really interested in the history of polar exploration, South Georgia's sort of it's a gimme. You got to do it. It's got so much more historic significance to it from those days of exploration. You mentioned that they found rescue in South Georgia, so there are times, it's not a guarantee. We get to visit Stromness, where Shackleton was rescued, and a lot of the times we can even do hikes. The Shackleton hike, we call it. You want to talk a little bit more about not just the historic trails that we can take, but just the hiking opportunities in South Georgia in general? You find it to be a lot more open than we find in Antarctica?
Yeah, there's a lot of hiking opportunities. It depends once again, but it all really depends on the weather you're given and what kind of wildlife and what kind of itinerary you've got going on. But the most famous of the hikes that people do is from Fortuna Bay over to Stromness, and this mirrors the last section of Shackleton crossing the island on his search for rescue. So it's a big bucket list item for many of the history buffs out there. But there are many more hikes, and some longer ones, and then some shorter ones. I think one thing that it's worth noting is that what makes that unique on these trips is when we're in Antarctica, we usually have restricted spaces to operate in just because of snow and ice and wildlife. There's not a lot of hiking that happens on the peninsula. There can be in the South Shetlands north of the peninsula, but South Georgia really gives you an opportunity to stretch your legs. And after a bunch of sea days getting there, you're probably going to want it. So trying to describe hikes to people is one of the most difficult things that we do in the expedition guide world. Is it a short, a medium, or a long hike? Is it strenuous? Is it easy? All we can really do is describe conditions in length. But what I can say is there's walks and hikes on South Georgia at different landings that suit pretty much everybody's needs. And most of the landing sites lend themselves to free roam areas and the opportunity to really stretch your legs. And the hikes can be gorgeous across just wide open tundra or through tussock grass. And if you've never seen tussock grass, it's these huge clumps of grass that are a solid meter tall and thick and often filled with fur seals yelping at you as you go through. It's a wild experience, and South Georgia, lends itself very well to some really lovely hikes.
I do think people need to understand that in Antarctica, we are restricted by glaciers, crevasses, and tons of other terrain obstacles that require us to stay a little bit more confined into landing sites, where in South Georgia, we don't have those hazards as predominantly. So if anything, the biggest restriction that we have in South Georgia is the wildlife, like you mentioned. We might not be able to walk as far down a beach as we would like to. But once you get away from the beaches, you do have a lot more room to stretch your legs and go out and do some nice hikes.
This makes me think that something worth noting is the differences between Antarctica and South Georgia, which are vast. They are extremely different places. The peninsula is covered in snow and ice and big, huge glaciated mountains. You're going to see sea ice. You're going to have icebergs floating all around. That is not South Georgia. South Georgia is a subantarctic island. Okay, so it's right at the Antarctic convergence, where the Atlantic Ocean and the Antarctic Ocean and the Southern Ocean crisscross. Right, so it's right there. So it's a completely different climate. While the island is mountainous and glaciated, you can think of more of continental mountains that you're used to than you would think of like what you see in Antarctica. It's not going to be a landscape of white unless you go very early season. It's green, it's lush even sometimes. Um, it's there's sandy beaches. It's a completely different beast than Antarctica is. So when you book these trips, you end up with a tremendous amount of variety. They're not even close to being the same place. There is some overlapping wildlife, but that's kind of where the similarities end.
And speaking of wildlife, that's what we go to South Georgia for. I know there's people like you. There are people like you, Jeff, who go for the history. I love the history and everything. You've gotten me way more into the history of it than I ever was. But we're going to South Georgia. People want the wildlife. They want the king penguins.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
That's what it's all about. Let's just very quickly summarize the difference in what they're going to experience just from the penguin side of things. And we'll dive into it, but let's give them just a little teaser.
Anybody who says king penguins aren't their favorite penguin, they're lying. They are.
I know. Mine's the Adelie. I have the Adelie penguin is my favorite penguin. I really love them. They're like little ninja assassins. I love the Adelie penguin. King penguin
Adelies
comes
are
in
great.
second.
Out of the brush tails, I'll take a chin strap. But overall, I'm going king.
I think I have videos of me walking around the ship asking people what their favorite penguin is, and it's a very heated debate. But the king penguin is one of the crowd favorites because also, just so we're clear, a lot of people mix up the emperor penguin and the king penguin. The emperor penguin is the largest penguin on Earth, but they are not the ones that you see in photos from South Georgia. Those ones are king penguins, the second largest penguin. They're way better. They're way more active. They're
very cool.
They're very cool, and they're very abundant.
They're very cool. Yeah.
But to put things into perspective, largest Gentoo colony in the Antarctic Peninsula is where?
Hooverville, I believe.
Hooverville. What are we looking at there? Maybe 6,000 or 7,000 pairs of penguins?
7,000 breeding pairs is last I heard.
Plus their chicks?
Don't quote me on that one, but I'm pretty sure.
I think that's about right. That's
pairs.
about right, right? That's the largest Gentoo penguin colony. There are colonies in the Weddell Sea of like Paulette Island and in the Danger Islands where you can find a lot more, like Adelies in much larger numbers, but it's very, very, very rare to go there. I would say that one of the largest colonies that we're going to see when we go on the typical classic Antarctica trip is somewhere around 7,000 pairs of penguins. How many penguins are we going to see at St. Andrews Bay?
500,000.
500,000 penguins. It's I don't think people really truly understand the difference.
It's amazing. I think many of us who are curious about South Georgia or even about penguins in general have seen these photos of just like the whole frame is just filled with penguins. And we see all these beautiful bright colors, these bright yellows and the blacks and the whites and all this contrast. Those are photos from South Georgia, almost certainly. And it's mind-blowing. It's overwhelming. I often compare it to the first time you see the Grand Canyon. If you've been to the Grand Canyon, it's so big that you can't really comprehend just how big it is. And standing at St. Andrews is similar to that. There are other landings that rival it for sure. But yeah, St. Andrews is the highest concentration. But the island is packed with king penguin colonies.
I remember I used to do photography lectures on the ship, and back then we had, I don't know, probably like when I started, we had like the iPhone 6 or something, and I made a comment that there were more penguins in the photo than there were pixels in the photo. So, and St. Andrews is just one of the big three. We're going to get to the big three, but it's the penguin populations that we go there for. And one of the comments that I tell people when they're not sure, like we can go back into whether or not it's worth it. I always tell them the last thing on your mind when you're standing in front of 500,000 penguins is how much extra money you spent on this trip. It's the furthest thought from your mind because you are just overwhelmed with it. And it's not just in St. Andrews. We call them the big three. We have St. Andrews, Salisbury, and Gold Harbor. And we like to say that These are the 3 spots that have the highest concentration of penguins. I'm going to argue that there's a 4th because I think Right Whale Bay is right up there with those 3. But it's one of my favorites.
I'm going to throw in a 5th, Neil. I'm going to throw in a 5th.
Go ahead.
Fortuna Bay has got to be my favorite.
That's awesome. I like Fortuna because the penguins go a lot deeper along the river, where when you're in like the other 3, you typically get them right up to the beach. As you're walking deeper into Fortuna, they're all lining that creek that runs through it.
Speaking of fantastic hikes, if you want to, Fortuna is an amazing place where you land on this beautiful beach, but then you have this easy, long 20-minute hike back into the colony that everybody can do. It is accessible to everybody. You get up to a high point and you're looking out over tens of thousands of king penguins. This is why it's my favorite spot. It's spectacular, and I think it's just the backdrop, the mountains, the glaciers, and also it's typically it's also where you start that Shackleton hike. So it's got a little bit of everything.
I think it's a good point you bring up because when people start looking into their South Georgia trip, their Google searches are typically going to come back with the big 3, the Salisbury, St. Andrews, and Gold Harbor. So they go into the trip with this expectation that they're going to go to all 3 of them, and that's where they need to go. And we have people who ask us before the trip, are we going to go here? Are we going to go here? Are we going to go here? And what do we say in expedition?
It depends.
It
depends. South Georgia is way more exposed. It's much more susceptible to canceled landings. So we have surf that we need to deal with that we don't experience on the peninsula. We have systems that come through there much more frequently. And I like to tell our passengers that if you make it to one of those big 3s, like the whole trip is already made. Everything after that is just cherry on top. If you make it to 2 of them, you've had an incredible expedition, way above expectations. And if you make it to all 3, you might as well go home and buy a lottery ticket, because I think in the 40 or so times I've been to South Georgia, I've done the big 3, all 3 in one trip, maybe 2 or 3 times. But as Jeff is saying, if you don't make it to any of those big 3, you still have these other ones. I love Right Whale Bay, and he loves Fortuna. I love Fortuna also. It's really hard to miss in South Georgia if you do make landings, because there is so much wildlife, it's overwhelming. And I also like to tell people that because we have the challenge of the surf, we might be able to get the Zodiacs out, but we might not be able to make a landing. And I personally believe that the cruises in South Georgia are just as significant as the landings. I understand that people want to walk with the penguins. I totally get it, because I went to South Georgia for the first time as a guest, and that's exactly what I wanted, was to walk with the penguin. But when you walk up to the front of a colony and you see all these penguins in front of you, it's extremely overwhelming. And as far as you can see, it's just penguins. And it's not until you get in a Zodiac and you cruise along the beach do you really understand how many penguins there are, because you're seeing them from another angle that you can't see from when you're up front. Nikki, did you do cruises when you were in South Georgia? And like, what's your opinion on that?
That's exactly what I was just going to say. One of my favorite moments from my trip was I was at St. Andrews Bay and we did a split landing. So that's when you spend half of the time doing a physical landing on the shore and then half of the time in a Zodiac. And I got to go on shore first and I got to walk among the penguins, and it was super cool, very overwhelming. But then when I was in the Zodiac and just cruising along the shore and just looking out and just seeing hundreds of thousands of these little dots, and then you also have seals playing in the water around you, and you also have penguins zooming underneath your Zodiacs, it's a moment that you can't really recreate in any other capacity. It was amazing.
You brought up a really good point. I think the king penguins are far more engaged with the Zodiacs than any other penguin that we get to experience on the peninsula.
Downright bouncing off the Zodiacs at some places, especially Salisbury Plain. Neil, something that you mentioned was expectations. And something I always try to drive home, especially if I'm leading the trip, is like, brush them off your shoulders. Leave your expectations behind. For starts, they're gonna be blown away, right? But like, you don't need to go to St. Andrews, or you don't need to go to Salisbury to have your dreams of these penguin encounters and these large numbers of birds met. You're going to have grand wildlife experiences no matter where you go in South Georgia. It would be a challenge to have you not have intimate and wonderful wildlife experiences. I don't think I could do it. I couldn't bring you there and not have that happen. It's impossible.
It's so hard to put in perspective how much wildlife there really is in South Georgia. And this is one of the main, if not the main reason we visit there. You'll often hear it referred to as the Galapagos of the Southern Ocean. That's a phrase that we hear from time to time.
The Galapagos of the Southern Ocean. I mean, it's accurate. I've not been to the Galapagos, but what I can say is South Georgia is the highest concentration of marine mammals on the planet. Period. That's mind blowing, right? So if that's something that you're interested in, it's a good place to go.
And it's not just the penguins, because I think that the elephant seals are a huge part of the attraction to South Georgia, especially in the early parts of the season when the big bull elephant seals are fighting one another on the beach. And we know that the elephant seals have taken the brunt of the effects of the bird flu, and they're going to need a little bit of time to recuperate. They didn't do as well as the birds did. The abundance of elephant seals there, we do get them from time to time on the peninsula trips. If we make it to a Walker Bay or something, we might catch a couple of them, and there's always a straggler here and there. But the elephant seals, especially the wieners, are adorable. And then we have the fur seals, and especially the fur seal pups. I think that they're the cutest. These little fur seal pups are so cute, especially when they're playing in the puddles and they're taking their first swims. It's adorable. Nikki, they were there when you were there, right?
Sure. Oh my goodness. It was absolutely mesmerizing. I loved watching them, and not only watching them, but watching them feed and watching them learn how to play. We talk about how penguins are really awkward when they move around. The fur seal pups are just as awkward. They're just sort of bobbling around like little nerds. It's amazing.
Yeah, if puppies are something that you're into and you find puppies to be adorable, South Georgia is going to knock your socks off, because
that's a good way.
fur seal pups are maybe the most adorable creature on the planet.
And they're trying to pull the flags out of the ground. We have to bring safety gear to the beach. They love playing with the bags and picking them up, and it's really cute.
Big beady eyes. And,
they're just super
so
bright-eyed
adorable.
and bushy-tailed, like little Disney cartoons.
Soft looking. They're adorable. It's
you want to pick them up. Yeah, they're the creatures that you're like, I could put in my pocket.
What's that? That viral audio is like, put it in the truck. We're taking it home with us.
If you're the kind of person who wants to book 2 South Georgia trips, you could go at different times of the year and find many different things. There is no best time of year. That's a myth. But what I would say is if you go around Christmas, a New Year's trip, you get those, you'll see fur seal pups being born on the beach. You will witness this for sure. But also you'll see, just them at their smallest state. But if you go later on in the year, in March, they've left mom, and you've got a bunch of teenagers running around on the shore and getting into trouble with each other, fighting with each other, playing in the waves. They're fun to watch throughout their whole growth cycle.
They're a surprise to the people, because people always say things like, came for the penguins, I stayed for the seals. It's just, there's so much, they're so enjoyable. We're going to wrap up the wildlife here really quickly on 2 more notes that I have written down. One, when we do a South Georgia itinerary, there are actually 4 species of penguins that we get that we can't see in the peninsula. I want to make sure that we cover that. We've got the king penguin we talked about. We got the macaroni penguin. We've got the rockhopper penguin, and we have the Magellanic penguin. Now, some South Georgia trips do exclude the Falklands, and those are rare. Most of them will go because it's it's a very convenient stop. But we do get the Magellanic penguin in the Falklands, along with the rockhopper. And then we do get a subspecies of the Gen 2 penguin. It's just a larger, gigantic Gen 2 penguin that they're talking about subspecies. You get the possibility of macaronis, which I love a good macaroni penguin. And then we have the kings. So we want to cover that there are other species of penguins. I think we're going to see a lot more seabirds. You get a lot more nesting seabirds there if you're into albatross and you're into petrels and stuff like that. We do have Bird Island and a lot more seabirds. So I think twitchers, bird aficionados, absolutely want to do a South Georgia trip. And then on top of that, we also talked about in the first episode with Phil about the baby penguin season and when to see baby penguins in the peninsula. And a surprise to a lot of people is that we can always see baby penguins in South Georgia.
It's true. You'll have king chicks all year round.
I don't think they're the prettiest of the chicks. But that's all personal preference. But they're on a much different breeding cycle than the rest of the penguin species. So anytime you visit South Georgia, you will get to see penguin chicks, king penguin chicks. I want to specify. And then
something else of note on the penguin front on South Georgia is the kings aren't the most populous penguin on the island. It's the macaronis. There's 5 to 7 million pairs. Unfortunately, it is difficult to get to them. Many are on the southern shore of these colonies and stuff. There are places like Hercules Bay, Cooper Bay, where we can certainly get to see the macaronis and stuff, but to get to the really big colonies is difficult. But they're there.
And that's about managing expectations. I want also people to understand that when we're doing these expeditions, we have checklists. If you're an expedition leader, right, you have a checklist in your office of all the things that we want to see. You have a box that says, we got to go see macaroni penguins. And you try everything you can to tick those boxes. It just doesn't always work. Weather, availability, seasonal considerations.
Yeah, I think the weather front is really worth touching on just a little bit more. Just look at South Georgia on a map. An island can't be more exposed and in a worse spot for severe weather coming and hitting it. And it hits it often, and it comes through in cycles. Whether you get, a window of 4 or 5 days of good weather or not, I don't know. It's really it's so out of our control, so it's not worth worrying about, I would say. Brush that one off your shoulders as well. There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing the captain can do about it. There's nothing the expedition leader can do about it. But like you were saying before, the Zodiac cruising, if you can't make a landing, because we get huge swell on these beaches. Some of these beaches are just huge shore breaks. If you've seen shore breaks in other places on the planet, you know that these are violent things and you can't land a Zodiac in them oftentimes. Sometimes we can pull some strings and we can really get the whole team together and do something called stern-in landings, which is fairly aggressive. We do it sometimes, but only when conditions are perfect. It's a challenge. So sometimes landings are just the weather doesn't let it happen. But the Zodiac cruising is tremendous. To cruise along the beaches of Salisbury Plain instead of landing, I would argue could be better.
I argued that once, and somebody on Reddit called me a liar and a scam artist because I tried to convince passengers that the Zodiac cruise was just as good as the landing. The person was in my Zodiac, and they don't like what I said, and they love to bring it up on Reddit from time to time. So,
how fun.
Yeah, just how dare I have an opinion, right? So one thing I'll note on Jeff, you summarized it perfectly. We don't need to touch on it again. One thing I will note is that if you are planning a South Georgia trip because of the weather, I would say if you have the time to ensure that you have a minimum of 4 days in South Georgia, because there are some trips that only have 2 or 3 days. They're like express trips. I would give yourself a minimum of 4 days in South Georgia because you need that buffer in case you do run into a weather system, because it usually sticks around for about 2 or 3 days. 2 is much more common, even just 1 or 2 days. You need to have a little bit of extra time for the ship to get around, find clean weather. Make sure you're looking at a South Georgia trip that has a minimum of 4 days on the island. That would be just the note I want to add to that. A couple more things I want to touch on before you want to go. Nikki, you have something to say?
I was just going to say something else that we touched on the hiking opportunities that are available in South Georgia, but we haven't touched on any other additional activities and what is and is not available if you're doing a South Georgia trip. And that might be worth having a chat about.
Well, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about it, because it's exactly what I was going to get to next. Actually, I totally forgot about it. You reeled me in. Yeah, let's start. For those at home who are listening, she just held up her notebook with a big checklist of things that we need to hit. So, and we are going to wrap this episode up here pretty soon because we're getting a little long on it. But go ahead, tell me a little bit about those activities and what the considerations are, because we've spent the whole time here pretty much talking about all of the benefits of South Georgia trips. Let's talk about some of the drawbacks. What are a couple of things that we need to consider on the inverse side?
I think the main thing is that if you're someone who is really particularly interested in camping and that's a non-negotiable for you, a South Georgia trip isn't going to be a good option, because South Georgia trips are no longer offering camping almost completely across the board. There isn't enough time in each place, and there's more concerns for the wildlife. Like, it's not permitted in South Georgia. You're not allowed to camp there.
But on top of that, because of these distances that we need to cover, because we have another 3 days of sailing from the peninsula to South Georgia, or vice versa, it puts a lot of strain on the team. And also because of the bird flu considerations, we are no longer allowed to use camping sites that have concentrations of wildlife. So on the eastern side of the peninsula, where a lot of these trips will visit, the Antarctic Sound region, the Weddell Sea region, we don't actually have any available camping sites that don't have concentrations of wildlife. So it makes camping extremely restrictive. So for, like Nikki said, if camping is non-negotiable for you and you want to do a South Georgia trip, you're going to have to pick between the two. Now, my thoughts on that, never in a million years would I ever give up South Georgia for the opportunity or the possibility of camping, because camping is not a given. You could give up a South Georgia trip to go camping, and then you have bad weather and you just can't get to go camp at all. So if you're deciding between South Georgia and camping, I'm going to make the decision for you. You're going to South Georgia. You are not going camping. That's the final one.
Yeah, so. Definitely fair choice.
Yeah, I'll back you up on that one. I agree.
And then that's another great question that comes up a lot of time. Crossing the Antarctic Circle versus visiting South Georgia, because those trips don't overlap that often either. We mentioned this a little bit earlier, there's only a few selections of trips that will offer a circle crossing and offer South Georgia. Again, South Georgia over the circle, 1,000%. Never would I give up the South Georgia for a circle trip. Jeff?
Yeah, and there are a few trips that offer crossing the circle and South Georgia and the Falklands, but they happen twice a season and they're quite pricey.
Yeah, I mean, the fuel consumption on those trips is humongous, like really humongous. The concentration of wildlife on the northern part of the peninsula is higher than down below the circle anyways. So I don't think you're missing anything by not crossing the circle. I mean, for some people, this is a bucket list item. They must cross the circle. And I get that. I understand that. It's a fun thing to do and it's exciting, but I don't think you gain so much as you would gain by going to South Georgia, weighing the scales.
I'd much rather wear a patch that said I went to South Georgia versus I crossed the circle. Big difference. Couple more important things before we wrap up. A lot of people are worried about crossing the Drake Passage and they want to fly. If you're interested in flying, your opportunities to visit South Georgia are almost going to be zero, because there's only 2 options that will fly over the Drake and visit South Georgia. And at the same time, you need to consider that the crossing between the peninsula and South Georgia is just like the Drake Passage in most cases. It's really not that significantly different. The Scotia Sea and the Southern Ocean is pretty rough as well. So you're going to save yourself 2 days of crossing the Drake Passage, but then you have another 6 sea days ahead of you between crossing from the peninsula to South Georgia to the Falklands, and the Falklands going home. So if you're considering wanting to skip the Drake by flying, but you also want to visit South Georgia, the only opportunity to do that is like 2 or 3 trips a year, and they're really expensive. You might as well just do the Drake Passage. And we're going to do a whole episode about the Drake Passage and why it's worth crossing. And again, we're going to talk about the historic significance of the Drake Passage. A lot happens in the Drake Passage, educationally. I think the morale or the bonding experience on board is really nice. But if you're interested in doing South Georgia, you should rule out the idea of flying the Drake. It just doesn't go hand in hand with one another.
Right. Well, and the good news is that when you do a South Georgia itinerary, you really only cross the Drake one time. So you are missing one of the Drake crossings. So that's, if you're someone who's scared of the Drake, this could be a good opportunity for you as well, because you only have to do it once.
Yeah. To go full circle, like, is it worth it? For some people who are asking, is it worth it? Especially those who are prone to seasickness. There's a lot of sea days on a South Georgia trip. It's true. You have to be prepared with that. What I would say is most people who suffer really badly from seasickness typically didn't prepare. Go see your doctor, get a real medication. Don't show up with Dramamine. Get something real. It works. These things work. You take it early. And maybe on the way south across the Drake, you have a hard time. But you do, the old saying, you get your sea legs. It's true. You get more and more comfortable in the rolly seas. By the end of the trip, when you're going from the Falklands back to Ushuaia, you probably feel fine. And it might even be, you might even be cruising through 5-meter swells and you'll feel fine. So I'm not promising anything, but going back though to, is it worth it? So many people who do suffer from seasickness, this is true of peninsula trips and this is true of South Georgia trips. They always say it's worth it. And they actually go out of their way to say that exact statement on a regular basis. I get that. So it is worth it.
Wrap it up. There we go. Put a pin in it. I do have 2 more things I want to talk about, but Jeff just summarized it so perfectly. So we're going to add a little anecdote here because Jeff, you summarized it perfectly. 1,000% South Georgia is worth it. There's no question about it. If you can get the time off and you can come up with the additional costs, even if it requires saving a little bit longer, adding South Georgia to your itinerary is really, really worth it.
Yeah.
We are going to do a whole episode on when to book because there's a lot of questions about booking early bird versus booking last minute. And if you are very budget conscious and you want to go to South Georgia, there are last minute opportunities for it. But I think that, the early bird market has been really good lately. And we'll dedicate a whole episode to that. So stay tuned for that episode. One more quick thing, really. Two more quick things. One more quick thing. I don't know. So one, before we wrap this all up, there are trips that skip the Falkland Islands. Jeff, in your opinion, Falkland Islands, some people say it's skippable. I say it's not. I think the Falkland Islands are Las Malvinas. I think they're extremely underappreciated. I love visiting the Falklands. If given the opportunity to skip it because of time commitments, would you say it's missable?
Yeah, underappreciated and unknown to most people. Most people, it's a sidebar on their whole trip, but definitely worth it. Crystal clear waters, white sand beaches with penguins on them. I mean, come on. Most people have no idea what it is they'd be missing. So do a little research. You guys, that's worthy of a whole nother episode. But also, the Falklands breaks up the trip pretty nicely. Otherwise, you have another really long stint between Ushuaia or Montevideo and South Georgia and stuff. So like, you really, I think it breaks up the trip really nicely. And after all these sea days, guys, it is nice to get off the ship and take a walk around. And the Falklands offers you an opportunity to walk around one of those communities that is on the edge of the planet, right? Stanley is a community on the edge of the planet, and I love these places, and I love talking to the people who live in these places. But like I said, whole nother episode.
And just getting a fish and chips and a cider at the pub is actually quite fun. You get to get out. And depends if you do it on the before or the after of it. But 2 more species of penguins. We have Gypsy Cove. If you're really into birds, we got a beautiful wildlife opportunity. If we make it to West Point, you're going to have the closest interaction with wildlife that you're going to have throughout the entire trip that you're on anyway. So 100%. Nikki, when you went to the Falklands, right? On your trip, was it a surprise to you? Did you expect it to be as good?
Yeah, I went in with absolutely no expectation, and I was still somehow blown away by it. The first place that we went to, there were albatross and penguins just coexisting together really, really closely. And it was the first stop that we made on the trip. And then there was also this wonderful woman who made us the most gorgeous pastries and had tea and cookies and coffee, and just having a chat with her was such a lovely experience as well. I think if you're doing a trip to South Georgia anyway, there's really not a lot of benefit of not going to the Falklands. I think it's such a gorgeous place. We unfortunately had to miss Stanley because the weather wasn't allowing us to stop, which was a huge bummer. So I guess I got to go back sometime soon and get that cider.
Nikki, I liked what you said, though. You showed up with no expectations and you were blown away. Bam. Yeah, good stuff.
Other than that, do we have any final thoughts? I mean, we've summed up there's so much more to South Georgia than what we've covered in this episode. And we're going to be doing deeper dives into these topics. Again, the history, the wildlife, the hiking opportunities and all that. These are all going to get much longer episodes. But I think that if people are listening to our podcast in sort of a chronological order based on what their planning process is, this is going to be one of the earliest episodes, because I think this is the first thing that people need to decide when they start planning their trip. Is South Georgia worth it? Yeah. 1,000%, a bajillion %. There's no question about it. I would absolutely argue that it is.
One thing that we didn't cover that maybe you want to add in is just if someone's just doing a peninsula trip, not just doing, if you're doing a peninsula trip and you feel like South Georgia is something you want to do, but you can't afford it right now, that's okay. You can still go on your peninsula trip, have a great time. You're probably going to go to the Gerlache, right? Go to that side of the peninsula, which is something that probably wouldn't be in the itinerary of your South Georgia trip, because you'd be going to Antarctic Sound and the Weddell Sea side. And the two different sides of the peninsula have completely different characters, right? So you could go to your peninsula trip, save up a bunch of money, get ready for your South Georgia trip in 5 years' time or whatever it might be, and then do both. I keep going back.
On that note, we didn't talk about this. There are trips that do only visit South Georgia. And the first time I ever went to South Georgia was South Georgia only. And I got 8 full days in South Georgia. It was one of the best, if not the best trip I've ever done. We had fantastic weather. It was early October. We had sunrises. We had sunsets. We had snow on the ground. It was incredible. A lot of the landing sites were a little bit more accessible because you know how later in the season, again, another episode, later in the season, the snow starts to melt. So we have creeks that we can't cross when we get to certain landing sites. Jeff is absolutely right. If you can only do Antarctica now, and then you want to set your sights on South Georgia for the future, you look at one of those South Georgia only trips. Only because you're going to get a lot more time in South Georgia. But if you're going to do, say, like a November Antarctica trip, and then you have the opportunity to do a December or January Antarctica, South Georgia combined trip, then maybe think about doing the peninsula again, because you'll get to see the peninsula in an entirely different setting than you saw the first time you were there. That's exactly what we talked about in the last episode. But if your time off only allows you to go off at the same time every year, and you're going back and you'd be doing the peninsula at the same time, I would then reconsider doing a South Georgia only trip to get the most amount of time there, because it's absolutely spectacular. Nikki looks like she's got something she wants to say, and then we're going to wrap this one up. Yeah, go. Come on, Nikki, hit me with it.
All I want to say is that the South Georgia only trips, a lot of them are getting pulled. So there aren't as many of them as I think there were in previous seasons. So if that is something that you want to consider, there's only maybe one or two that are available now. Just putting that out there.
We'll see how it unfolds in the future.
Yeah, with any
it's a shame to hear that. It's a shame to hear that, because I think the intention of those trips was to recapture the audience that had been to the peninsula with them and then wants to go back and see more South Georgia. But I understand for people, it's impossible for them to sell those trips to the people who haven't been to Antarctica yet, because you're going that far. You might as well go see Antarctica, the seventh continent. And as more and more people visit Antarctica each year, there are people who are going to want to start to visit South Georgia. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds for the future offerings that we're going to see from operators. And I'm going to advocate that we have more of those. But again, if they're not selling, I can't expect companies to keep them on their roster. So, other than that, I think we've pretty much covered everything that's on my list. We talked about the clockwise versus the counterclockwise. It's really just go with trip works the best for you. I have a preference. Jeff has a preference. I prefer counterclockwise as well. I think you should go to the peninsula first and then go to South Georgia, because I think that if you want to see the abundance of penguins, you want to see less penguins first and then get blown away by more penguins. Because if you go see all the millions of penguins in South Georgia and you get to Antarctica, it might be a little underwhelming. That's a personal preference. I wouldn't book my trip or place my trip around it. If you have the option between two of them, I would say go counterclockwise. Jeff likes the counterclockwise routine as well.
Yeah, it kind of has a crescendo,
Yeah.
South Georgia being that.
Other than that, I've got everything ticked off on my list. Like I said, there's going to be so many more episodes about South Georgia. We know this is a little bit longer episode than we are typically going to do, but there was just so much to cover. I think, Jeff, thank you so much for being a part of this. You have so much knowledge and so much information, and you are so passionate about South Georgia that I really knew the second you agreed to do this with us that it was going to be a banger of an episode. I expect to have you on the show many more times in the future. You're going to be an excellent guest. For somebody who's never did a podcast, you crushed it. Everybody at home, please give Jeff a round of applause. Yeah. Do we get one of those? Do we have one of those sound effects? I don't think we're doing sound bites quite yet. So maybe as we grow the podcast. Nikki, thank you for being the co-host today. Again, you're going to be co-hosting a lot of episodes. If anybody has any questions, we didn't get to the question box in this episode. We'll do them in the next episode because we're running a little long on this one. But I did get your questions. We will address those in the future. And I think we actually touched on what they were. We touched on a couple of those questions throughout the episode, just naturally. So for everybody listening, thank you so much for tuning in to the Drake Shake podcast. So happy to have you here listening. We really are excited for a lot of the future episodes that are to come. If you have any feedback, any questions, any comments, please do email us at info@thedrakeshake.com. If you're interested in looking at some of these opportunities, you can always go visit our website, letsgopolar.com. You can go search by South Georgia itineraries. Feel free to reach out to somebody from our team. And if you got any questions and you're not a member of our Facebook group yet, you can go find us on Facebook. It's the Antarctica Travel Group. Post up a question. You got an incredible community of people there who are happy to support you, answer your questions. I'm very active in there. My team is very active in there. And other than that, thanks again. Thanks, Jeff Nagel. Looking forward to seeing you down the line.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Neil. It's been a good time.
So good to meet you. Thank you so much. That was really nice.
Yeah, fantastic. And to everybody at home, go explore the world. Have fun.
But that's the episode. Thank you, everybody. My name is Neil Drake, and that was The Shake.
Ooh.
If you found today's episode helpful, don't forget to subscribe. Every week, we discuss a new topic in depth. And if you have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, feel free to drop us a line at info@thedrakeshake.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you in the next episode.